This is the International Soccer Preview, and we are Soccer Files Canada. Welcome to Series 17. We're looking at the squads of the 2023 Gold Cup. This is the short version for Cuba's players. Here we go. It's June, and welcome back to part 2. If you're coming from part 1, welcome anew if you're coming just in for the short version. So I'll just orient you by telling you what we did in part 1. So we created a list of possible candidates for the team. That's mostly players who, mostly based on players who have played for the team since 2022. And we categorized them first by their position to organize the discussion, and then by their likelihood of making the team. So you're going to see that list as we go through it once again in part 2 and tell you who made the team, who made the preliminary squad, and who made or who didn't even make the preliminary squad. So we have a 33-man preliminary squad for Cuba, and in part 1 we had a lot of confusion about what rules there are for Cubans leaving the country, or playing in the country, or not playing in the country, or defecting. So I want to correct one mistake I made. We did say during the 2015 and 2019, and actually dating back to well before that, players defecting from the team coming over, and then we said there was no problem in 2021 because they weren't part of the cup. Well, the reason they weren't part of the cup was part of the problem. For some reason, they made them play a playoff game in the United States, and I'm not sure why they had to play that game in the United States when they have such problems getting visas and stuff. So they were unable to make it to that game due to visa problems and also COVID problems. So they actually did struggle also in 2021. Things do seem a bit more settled this time in terms of I haven't heard of any problems or any expected problems for Cuba. So hopefully they can bring their best team to the Cup and have no problem entering the country. And if that's the case, then we will see these players. Let's move on to talk about the squad and candidates. So we began by saying Raul Menderos was the manager in their last tournament in 2019, and Pablo Sanchez took over after that. So no problems there. It seems like Pablo Sanchez will be leading them through the cup, unlike Mexico, whose manager was fired between our parts 1 and 2. Pablo Sanchez leading the way. Okay, for goalkeepers, we had a definite candidate in Sandy Sanchez and 2 likely candidates, as well as 1 possible but unlikely. So it all seemed fairly well laid out, and indeed it was, because our 3 candidates there, Sandy Sanchez, and the 2 likely candidates, Nelson Johnson and Reiko Arozarena, did make the final squad. We decided to put Reiko Arozarena slightly ahead of Nelson Johnson there, but really we're not kind of get into predicting starters here, but we did think that Arozarena was slightly more likely than Nelson Johnson. Nevertheless, both of them made it. However, Elior Pozo, our possible but unlikely candidate, not even selected for the preliminary squad. On to defense and central midfielders, we had a definite candidate in Carlos Vasquez, often called Cavafe, and he did make the squad, the final squad, as did our likely candidate, Yosel Piedra. We had 3 possible candidates for the making the cup, and all 3 of them made it. So Eduardo Hernandez, Modesto Mendez, and Mario Penalver all selected for the final squad there. And possible, but not possible, but unlikely, we have a new candidates. So not just those 5, but one player added to the mix there, and that is Romario Torres. And because we didn't introduce him in the first part of the podcast, we'll introduce him here. So he is just 18 years old and plays for Nacional in Uruguay, so pretty interesting case here. He moved from Artemisa to Nacional in 2023, and he was new to the squad. He was subbed in for one of the 2 warm-up games immediately before the tournament, and he was on the bench for the other. So a latecomer to the squad, and so one of the surprises there. Okay, at left back, we had a definite candidate in Dario Moreon, and he did make the final squad, as did the possible candidate Jorge Luis Corrales, making the final squad there. At the right back position, though, we had a likely candidate who did not make the squad. So Grable Palmer only selected for the preliminary squad there. And we also had one general defender in Osniel Ramos, and he did not make the preliminary squad. Moving on to midfield, a definite candidate in Carol Espino, but probably the biggest surprise here, as he was not selected even for the preliminary squad, despite starting 8 of their 9 games since the start of 2022, as we talked about in the first part of the podcast. We kind of justified why we placed them where we did, and so this really comes as a surprise. That is Carol Espino. But we did have a possible candidate in Nasser Sando, and Nasser Sando did make the squad. But David Inserti, who we thought was seemingly off the squad, proves to be so by not being selected even for the preliminary squad. Moving on to central midfielders. That's a singular because they only had one, and it was at I think I initially had him as a likely candidate, and during part 1 we moved him down to possible. It's Denilson Milanes, but maybe we should have left him as a likely candidate because he did make the squad. Denilson Milanes, not a surprise really, because there's only one candidate or one player coded as a central midfielder. We have a couple of left midfielders, though, and Unia Perez we considered a definite candidate, and he made the squad. And Roberni Caballero at the possible level also made the squad. We had Kevin Martin as possible but unlikely. He did make the preliminary squad, but not the final cut to the Gold Cup squad. Among right midfielders, we had a likely candidate in Rolando Abreu, but he was only named to the preliminary squad there. And that's all we had for right midfielders. For left wingers, we had William Pozo Venta as a definite candidate, and he made the squad. And Yasniel Matos, the likely candidate, also made the squad. We were really curious about Onel Hernandez, but in fact, the mystery deepens because we had him seemingly off the squad. He last appeared for the team in June 2022. So we thought he was gone, and he's not completely gone. He was named to the preliminary squad. So we're not sure how that leaves him in relation to Cuba, whether he's kind of on the team or off the team. But anyway, he's not on the World Cup, on the Gold Cup squad here. For general midfielders, we had a possible candidate. We moved him up from possible but unlikely to possible, and it was Jasael Herrera. and we were wise in moving him up because he did make the final squad, Jasael Herrera. However, the player who seemed to be off the squad, Asmel Nunez, not selected even for the preliminary squad. For forwards, we began with Dayron Reyes. Dayron Reyes was a definite candidate. However, he was coded as or flagged as an injury, and it seems that injury has prevented him from even being named to the preliminary squad. So that is unfortunate for Cuba. The other candidate we had for attacking midfielder was Erikel Hernandez, and he does make the final squad, as we thought he was likely to do. Okay, so we'll summarize the injuries later. We also had an injury doubt for secondary striker Christian Flores, and it proves that his injury is keeping him off the squad too. So that's two attacking players that they miss. Christian Flores not named even to the preliminary squad. And finally, the forwards, we have Mikel Reyes as a definite candidate and Luis Paradella as an even more definite candidate. And both of those did make the final squad. We had Daniel Diaz as a possible candidate. He also made the final squad. And then we finished with the interesting case of Marcel Hernandez, who came back from a nine-year absence to play a couple of games. But that did prove to be short-lived, as he did not make even the preliminary squad. But we do have one new candidate here, and that is Alder Ruiz. So Alder Ruiz, we didn't talk about in the first part of the podcast because he wasn't on our radar. That podcast was in May, and he started both of their warm-up games immediately before the tournament in June. So he kind of came in there right at the end. He has then 2 caps, and he interestingly plays for Europa FC in Gibraltar, having played with another team in Gibraltar, Lynx FC, and prior to that in Spain. So pretty interesting club affiliation there. But Alder Ruiz making it at the last minute there to the cup. Okay, well, we're going to finish just by summarizing some of this information, beginning with notable non-selections, and we have a few. We have right back Grable Palmer, who we thought was a likely candidate, and he just made the preliminary squad. We have Carral Espino, we thought was a definite candidate, and he was not even selected for the preliminary squad. Rolando Abreu, another likely candidate, only made it to the preliminary squad. And, a couple of others, but they are injuries rather than non-selection. So we'll move on to surprise inclusions. We have a couple, Jasael Herrera. We considered him, initially we considered him possible but unlikely, and then we moved him up to possible. So not as much as a surprise as all that. We kind of saved ourselves there in part 1. But the real mystery is Onel Hernandez and what role he plays for Cuba, seemingly off the squad, but then named to the preliminary squad. Difficult to know what's going on. It could be as simple as they just hope that he would change his mind and come on over. So you have to be named on the preliminary squad to make the final squad. So it could be that they just put his name on the list in hopes that he would come. But I'm not sure. Okay, new players. We had 2 of them. First one was Romario Torres making the squad. So this also acts as a bit of a surprise. Coming in right at the end there, playing for Nacional in Uruguay. And I believe one of their 2 warm-up games was against Uruguay. And the other one, Alder Ruiz, again added just before the tournament there. And he plays in Gibraltar. For other new players, we had 6 names that were not on our radar. We didn't have them in the soccer files, so now we add them to the soccer files, but they only made the preliminary squad, and we don't see a lot of sense in going over those names here. But if they come into the picture more in the future, they are already on our radar. And finally, we finish with injuries, so we mentioned them. Dayron Reyes dropped from the squad due to injury. They knew about that apparently before they made the preliminary squad. He got his injury in the middle of May, so it was somewhat late and an unknown return date. It seemed pretty serious with a ruptured cruciate ligament injury, so we didn't think he would recover in time to make it to the Cup. That is too bad. And then the other one, also an attacker, Christian Flores, same thing, cruciate ligament injury. He suffered his in early February 2023 and is not expected back until October 2023. So that gives you kind of the range of that cruciate ligament injury. I thought it was 9 months to a year, and it looks like about 9 months here too. That would be a fairly quick recovery if Christian Flores is back for his Costa Rican team by October. Anyway, certainly they're out of the question for the Gold Cup here, and that brings us to the end